On a freezing winter night, an old woman named Martha opened her door to find two shivering puppies huddled outside. With a kind heart, she took them in, wrapping them in blankets, never imagining how completely her quiet life was about to change. By morning, her secluded cabin in the woods was surrounded. Police cars flashed their red and blue lights, and officers shouted commands into the crisp air. The villagers, hearing the commotion, would whisper, "Why had the police come? What had those dogs brought with them?" The truth, when it emerged, would leave an entire town shocked, and Martha's life altered forever. Snow fell in soft, continuous waves over the pine forest, muffling every sound. Deep within those woods, a small log cabin stood, smoke rising lazily from its stone chimney. Inside, 80-year-old Martha adjusted the last piece of firewood, brushing ash from her faded wool sweater. She had lived alone for nearly 2 decades, ever since her husband passed away. Life was quiet, sometimes too quiet, but she preferred it that way. The world beyond the trees felt busy and harsh. Here, she found peace in the crackle of fire and the steady rhythm of her own breath. Outside, night crept in fast. The thermometer nailed to the porch read well below freezing, and the wind's low howl carried through the cracks of the old wooden walls. Martha sipped her tea, pulling a heavy blanket across her knees. She thought about how few people ever ventured this far out during winter. A neighbor might drop by once a week with groceries, but mostly the forest and the sky were her only company. She wasn't afraid of solitude. In fact, she often said aloud to the empty room, "Silence is its own kind of music." Still, a tiny ache sometimes stirred in her chest when she looked at the rocking chair across from hers. It remained empty year after year, a quiet reminder of memories now gone. Tonight felt colder than usual, and a restless unease nudged at her heart. She stirred the fire again, listening to the wood hiss and pop. The clock ticked steadily on the mantel, marking another ordinary winter night, until something faint and unexpected brushed against that silence. A sound so soft she almost thought she imagined it. A distant whimper carried on the icy wind. Martha paused mid-sip, the rim of her teacup trembling against her lips. The faint sound came again, high-pitched and broken, like a small cry carried on the gusting wind. At first, she wondered if the old pine outside was groaning under the weight of snow, but this noise had urgency in it, a plea that tugged at her heart. She set the cup down and tilted her head, letting the crackle of the fire fade into the background. There it was once more, a soft whimper, then a second one, overlapping like echoes of distress. Her first instinct was caution. Wild animals sometimes roamed these woods, foxes, raccoons, even the occasional coyote. Yet something about the sound felt different, too desperate, too cold. Wrapping her thick shawl around her shoulders, she reached for the lantern that always waited near the door. The metal handle was icy against her palm. When she opened the door, a blast of frigid air rushed inside, snatching the warmth from the room and filling her lungs with a sharp winter bite. Moonlight spilled across the porch and the surrounding snow, turning every drift into silver. At first, she saw only darkness between the trees. Then, a faint movement caught her eye near the edge of the steps. 2 small shapes huddled close together, shivering so violently they seemed to quiver like leaves in the wind. Martha squinted, lowering the lantern. Tiny eyes reflected the light back at her, wide, frightened, and pleading. As she stepped closer, the forms became clear. 2 puppies, their fur dusted with snow, paws half buried in the icy crust. They looked barely old enough to be away from their mother. The smaller one whimpered again, a thin sound almost lost in the swirling wind. The bigger pup pressed against its sibling as if to shield it. A surge of compassion welled in Martha's chest. Out here on a night like this, they wouldn't last long. Still, questions flashed through her mind. Where is their mother? How did they get here? The forest stretched silent and empty for miles. Whatever the answers were, the urgency in those tiny cries left no room for hesitation. Martha's breath formed little clouds as she crouched beside the trembling puppies. Their fur was damp with melting snow, and she could feel the cold seeping from their tiny bodies. The larger pup lifted its head and met her eyes as if begging for help. That one simple look pierced the old woman's heart. She extended a gloved hand, moving slowly so she wouldn't scare them. "It's okay, little ones," she whispered, her voice soft against the howling wind. "You're safe now." The smaller pup hesitated, its ears twitching at every creak of the forest, but the bigger one inched forward, nose quivering, and pressed against her hand. That gentle trust decided everything. Martha slid her arms beneath both pups, surprised at how light they were. Their bodies shook violently, and she felt their tiny hearts racing against her palms. Without another thought, she rose and hurried back to the cabin, shielding them with her shawl from the biting wind. Inside, the fire's warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. She set the pups on a thick rug near the hearth and quickly shut the door. The sudden contrast made them blink and squint, but they didn't resist. Instead, they collapsed against each other, still trembling, but no longer from fear alone. Exhaustion was setting in. Martha fetched an old quilt from the rocking chair and tucked it around their small forms, tucking the corners like she once did for her grandchildren. Her mind buzzed with practical worries. They'll need food, warm milk, maybe a box for a bed. Yet, stronger than those thoughts was an unexpected surge of tenderness. It had been years since something so small and helpless depended on her. A quiet purpose filled the room, melting a loneliness she had long accepted. As she warmed milk on the stove, the puppies began to relax, tiny tails giving tentative wags. Martha smiled, feeling the weight of the cold night ease from her heart. She had no idea who they belonged to or how they had found her remote cabin. All she knew was simple and undeniable. She couldn't turn them away. Tonight, these two lost souls had found a home. The cabin soon glowed with gentle warmth, the fire's steady crackle blending with the soft sighs of the puppies. Martha poured the warm milk into a shallow bowl and set it carefully on the floor. At first, the pups only sniffed, uncertain of this new place, but hunger won. They dipped their tiny noses in and began to lap eagerly, their tails twitching with each gulp. A quiet chuckle escaped Martha. The sound surprised her. It had been so long since she'd laughed out loud to herself. When the bowl was empty, she wiped their small faces with a corner of the quilt and sat cross-legged beside them. One pup climbed onto her lap, its little claws catching the fabric of her sweater while the other nestled close against her side. Their shivering had eased, replaced by a slow, trusting warmth. She stroked their soft ears, marveling at the rhythm of their breathing. "You two came out of nowhere," she murmured. "But maybe you were meant to." Outside, the storm deepened. Wind rattled the shutters and snow pressed hard against the windows. But inside the cabin, a different kind of silence settled, one filled with calm and companionship. For the first time in years, Martha didn't feel the vast emptiness of the woods around her. She felt needed. As the night wore on, the pups followed her every movement. When she stood to add wood to the fire, they trotted after her. When she finally settled in her rocking chair, they curled up at her feet, their breathing in perfect sync with the creak of the chair. She whispered a short prayer of thanks, her eyes softening. By midnight, the fire dimmed to glowing embers. The puppies lay wrapped in the quilt, warm and safe, their tiny paws twitching as they dreamed. Martha drew her own blanket close and closed her eyes with a rare, contented sigh. She couldn't know that outside the forest held secrets, or that tonight's quiet would shatter with the dawn. For now, in the gentle heartbeat of the cabin, an old woman and two rescued lives slept as if they had always belonged together. The first pale light of morning slipped through the frosted windows, turning the cabin's walls a soft gray. Martha stirred awake to the sound of gentle scratching. For a moment she thought it was just the old timbers settling in the cold, but then she heard a low whine. The puppies were already up, tails stiff, ears pricked. Instead of the sleepy stretching she expected, they moved with quick, uneasy steps across the wooden floor. "Easy, little ones," she said softly, drawing the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But they didn't settle. The larger pup paced to the door, sniffing hard at the crack beneath it. The smaller one circled the rug, letting out short, urgent barks that echoed strangely in the quiet room. Martha frowned. All night they had been peaceful. Now they were alert, almost agitated. She rose and peered through the window. The forest outside lay silent under a heavy blanket of snow, unbroken except for faint animal tracks along the tree line. No movement, no visitors, yet the pups' noses twitched wildly, as if they caught a scent invisible to her. They darted from door to window, whining and scratching at the wood, tails rigid. "Did something spook you out there?" she murmured, kneeling to calm them. But when she reached to stroke the bigger pup's back, it stiffened and gave a soft growl. Not at her, but at something beyond the walls. The sound was low and vibrating, a warning that raised goosebumps on her skin. A faint unease settled over Martha. She double-checked the latch on the door and listened. The forest remained silent, but the puppies didn't believe in silence. They pressed close together, eyes fixed on the window as though expecting something or someone to appear. She added fresh wood to the fire, trying to shake a chill that wasn't from the cold alone. The night before had been about comfort and rescue. This morning, an invisible tension filled the cabin, carried in on the instincts of two small creatures who seemed to know more than she did about what waited in the snowy woods. The day passed in a muted haze of falling snow. By evening, the world outside Martha's cabin looked like a white ocean. Endless drifts, no footprints, no sign of life. Yet, the puppies never truly relaxed. They ate their supper but kept glancing toward the door, ears flicking at every creak of the timbers. Their unease pressed on Martha like a quiet weight she couldn't explain. By nightfall, the storm had calmed, leaving a brittle stillness that felt sharper than the wind. Martha settled into her rocking chair, a book in her lap, but her eyes kept straying to the window. The pups dozed fitfully on the rug, twitching at sounds she couldn't hear. The ticking clock was the only steady rhythm until it wasn't. A sudden, heavy thud broke the silence. It wasn't the settling of wood or the crack of ice. This was deliberate, a knock. 3 slow, unmistakable raps against the front door. Martha's breath caught. Few people ever visited in winter, and no one came unannounced after dark. The puppies leapt to their feet, barking in sharp bursts that echoed through the small cabin. Their hackles rose, tiny bodies bristling with alarm. Heart pounding, Martha set her book aside and stood. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer, only the faint whisper of wind slipping through the trees. She reached for the lantern and edged closer. Again, 3 measured knocks, each one sending a tremor through the wooden frame. Through the frosted glass, she saw nothing but shadows of pine and moonlight. No silhouette, no footprints in the fresh snow. The puppies growled low, their eyes locked on the door as if they sensed something she could not. Martha hesitated, hand on the latch. Instinct told her to stay put, to wait, but another voice urged caution of a different kind. What if someone needs help? The forest could be cruel on nights like this. Torn between fear and compassion, she finally whispered, "Not tonight," and stepped back, sliding the deadbolt firmly into place. The knocking stopped, leaving behind a silence so deep it roared in her ears. But the puppies stayed tense long after, staring at the door as though the night itself were holding its breath. The first thing Martha noticed was the light, brighter than usual, flickering against the walls like fire. For a split second, she feared the cabin had caught flame. Then came the sound, a sharp mechanical wail that cut through the stillness of dawn. The puppies barked wildly, scrambling to the window. Martha threw off her blanket and hurried after them, heart thudding. Outside, the world that had been silent just hours ago now blazed with motion. Red and blue lights pulsed against the snow, painting the pines in eerie flashes. At least 4 police vehicles lined the narrow path to her cabin, their tires half buried in fresh drifts. Officers in heavy winter gear fanned out across the yard, their voices clipped and urgent. For a breathless moment, Martha simply stared. She had lived in these woods for 20 years without so much as a neighbor's complaint. Why now? Why this? The puppies pressed against the door, tails stiff, barking at the figures moving outside. One officer raised a megaphone, his voice carrying over the crunch of boots. "Ma'am, this is the county sheriff's department. Please remain inside and come to the door slowly when instructed." Her pulse quickened. "Remain inside." The phrase felt like a command meant for someone dangerous. Martha's mind raced. Had there been an accident nearby? A fugitive on the run? She glanced toward the door she'd double-locked after last night's mysterious knocks. A chill threaded through her spine. Another officer approached, motioning toward the windows, his hand resting near his holster. Snow sprayed beneath his boots as he shouted, "Ma'am, please step forward. We need to speak with you immediately." The pups barked even louder, spinning in frantic circles as though confirming that the danger they sensed in the night had arrived with the morning. Martha drew a shaky breath, her fingers hovering over the latch. The quiet life she had cherished for decades was gone, replaced by flashing lights, urgent voices, and a mystery that had arrived with the cold. Whatever waited beyond that door, it was about to change everything. Martha's hands trembled as she unlatched the door, the cold air rushing in like a wave the moment she cracked it open. The puppies darted to her side, growling low but refusing to back away. Outside, several officers stood in a tight semicircle, their breath fogging in the frigid morning. The nearest one, a tall man with a dark winter coat and a badge gleaming on his chest, raised a gloved hand in a calming gesture. "Ma'am, please step out where we can see you," he said firmly, though not unkindly. "You're safe, but we need to talk." "Safe?" The word echoed strangely. Martha's heart pounded against her ribs. She had nothing to hide. She lived alone, paid her taxes, and had spoken to no one but the grocer all week. Still, the sight of so many uniforms on her quiet property felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's nightmare. "What? What is this about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here?" The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, a younger woman scanning the tree line with watchful eyes. "We'll explain everything shortly," he said. "First, we need to confirm that everyone inside is okay. Are you alone?" Martha hesitated. The question prickled her nerves. "It's just me," she said finally, "and 2 puppies I found last night." At the mention of the dogs, several officers stiffened. One lifted a radio to his mouth, speaking quickly into it. The younger woman's gaze sharpened as she stepped closer, kneeling slightly to peer at the pups who pressed protectively against Martha's legs. Their sudden alertness deepened Martha's unease. "Ma'am," the tall officer continued carefully, "did anyone else come to your door overnight? Did you hear or see anything unusual?" A flash of memory struck. The deliberate midnight knocks. Her breath caught. She hadn't told anyone about that. "There was someone," she admitted slowly. "But when I called out, no one answered." The officer's jaw tightened. Radios crackled around them, carrying clipped voices and coded numbers. Whatever had happened out in the woods, it wasn't random. And now Martha stood at the center of something far bigger than a quiet night and 2 lost dogs. The cold bit through Martha's sweater as she stepped fully onto the porch. The 2 puppies crowded her ankles, barking at the strangers. One officer gently motioned for her to keep them close. "Ma'am," he said, his breath visible in the frosty air, "we need you to answer a few urgent questions." His tone carried a weight that tightened the knot in her chest. Martha clutched the doorframe. I don't understand. I live alone. I haven't done anything wrong." Her voice wavered, carried away by the wind. The tall officer with the dark coat took a cautious step forward. "We're not saying you did, but something happened nearby last night. Around midnight, a serious incident occurred not far from here. We have reason to believe someone may have passed through this area, possibly even approached your cabin." Her heart thudded as the memory of those 3 slow, deliberate knocks replayed in her mind. The dogs had known. They had sensed something she couldn't. "Did you hear anything unusual?" Another officer pressed, his eyes scanning every corner of her small porch. "Voices? Vehicles? Footsteps?" Martha swallowed hard. "Just knocking, 3 times. I called out, but no one answered. When I looked, I didn't see a soul." The younger female officer exchanged a sharp glance with her partner. "Ma'am, when you say no one, are you certain? Any shadows or movement at all?" "No," Martha said, her voice firmer now. "Only darkness and snow." The radios on their belts crackled with a burst of static and clipped words. "Evidence located. Possible prints leading west. Proceed with caution." The officer's posture stiffened instantly. One of them crouched to eye the puppies. "And these dogs, how did they come to you?" Martha explained how she'd found them shivering on her porch, how they had seemed almost desperate to get inside. As she spoke, she realized how strange it sounded. 2 abandoned puppies, a midnight knock, and now armed officers at her door. The lead officer nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Ma'am, it's possible those animals aren't just strays. They may have followed someone or something here. We need to know everything they did and everywhere they went inside your home." The words hit Martha like a sudden gust of icy wind, not just strays. She looked down at the puppies, who now sat side by side, their tiny chests rising and falling in nervous rhythm. They gazed up at her with trusting eyes, but their ears twitched toward every sound in the woods as if they were still on duty. The tall officer's radio crackled again. A firm voice came through. "Sheriff, we found something on the North Trail. Blood traces and fresh prints human leading straight toward the cabin." Every officer around Martha stiffened. The female deputy's hand instinctively hovered near her sidearm. Martha felt her stomach drop. "Blood?" she whispered, her breath barely forming the word. The sheriff nodded grimly. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe these dogs may have witnessed a violent crime last night. It's possible someone injured tried to seek shelter here or to hide something nearby." The younger pup let out a sharp bark as if to punctuate his words, then trotted toward the porch railing, nose working furiously. The bigger pup followed, pawing at a corner of the deck. Martha blinked in confusion. That spot looked perfectly ordinary, just snow and old wood. One officer crouched to inspect where the puppy scratched. He brushed aside a layer of snow and frowned. "Sheriff," he called, his voice tight, "you need to see this." The group gathered as he lifted a small dark object from beneath the loose board, a strip of torn fabric, stained deep red. Martha's breath caught. The puppies began to whine, circling the spot as though urging everyone to look deeper. The sheriff's face hardened. "This isn't just a stray dog rescue," he said quietly. "Someone bled here, and it wasn't long ago." He straightened, scanning the tree line. "Lock this area down. No one in or out until forensics arrives." Martha's knees weakened. She gripped the porch rail to steady herself. The morning's cold was nothing compared to the chill settling in her chest. She had welcomed these creatures out of simple compassion. Now it seemed they carried with them the trail of a crime, a trail that ended at her doorstep. The smaller pup gave a final sharp bark and looked back at her, eyes bright with something almost human, as if to say the mystery wasn't over. Martha shivered. The quiet world she'd known had vanished, replaced by a dark puzzle her unexpected guests had dragged from the night into the harsh light of day. The sheriff lowered his radio and turned back to Martha, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Ma'am," he said steadily, "I need you to think carefully. Did anyone, any stranger, come near your cabin in the past day or two, even before last night?" Martha shook her head, trying to recall every detail of the quiet week. "No one," she said finally. "I rarely have visitors in winter. Only the grocer comes by, and that was 3 days ago." Her mind replayed the memory of the midnight knocks. "Except those knocks," she added softly. "I never saw who it was." The female deputy crouched beside the spot where the fabric had been found, examining the disturbed snow. "Sheriff, look at this," she called. Beneath the top layer of powder lay a faint impression, larger than any animal print, yet oddly staggered. She brushed carefully until the shape became clear, the tread of a heavy boot, half smeared with blood. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "That matches the description from dispatch. We've been tracking a suspect who fled a violent robbery in town last night. He was wounded, armed, and last seen heading into these woods." He turned to Martha, his voice lower but urgent. "Ma'am, those puppies may have followed him or been abandoned by him. Either way, they could be our best clue." Martha blinked, stunned. "You think the dogs were with him?" "It's possible," the deputy replied. "Sometimes criminals use animals to mislead trackers, or the dogs might have escaped and led us straight here. Either way, they know something we don't." As if on cue, the bigger pup trotted to the porch steps, nose pressed to the icy planks. He let out a short, commanding bark, then darted a few feet into the yard before looking back. The smaller pup followed, tail stiff. "They're tracking," the sheriff muttered, recognition flashing in his eyes. "They're pointing us to the trail." He signaled to his team, "Follow their lead, but keep your distance." This suspect is dangerous. Martha's breath caught as she watched the two tiny figures nose through the snow with uncanny purpose. What she'd thought were simply abandoned puppies might be the very reason the police had found her cabin so quickly. These little lives she'd saved were now revealing the path of a criminal hiding somewhere in the frozen woods. The sheriff turned back to her, his voice a mix of gratitude and gravity. "Ma'am, without these dogs and without you taking them in, we might never have known where to look next." The bigger pup bounded ahead through the snow, nose down, every movement sharp with purpose. The smaller one stayed close behind, pausing only to glance back at Martha and the cluster of officers who now followed cautiously. The forest, quiet just hours ago, seemed to lean in around them, branches creaking softly as if holding its own breath. Sheriff Dalton gestured for his team to fan out, but keep a clear line of sight to the dogs. "Stay alert," he warned in a low voice. If the suspect's wounded, he could still be armed and desperate. Radios crackled with updates as deputies confirmed the trail matched the earlier boot prints. Martha kept to the rear, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She had taken the pups in to protect them, yet now they were leading strangers into danger. Still, the determination in their tiny bodies was unmistakable. These weren't lost pets anymore. They moved like seasoned trackers, every bark and sudden pawing pointing the way. The group followed the dogs deeper into the woods until the pups stopped abruptly beside a thick cluster of spruce. The bigger one growled low, pawing at a half-buried mound of snow near the base of a tree. A deputy carefully brushed away the powder and stiffened. Beneath lay a canvas bag stained with dried blood and partially unzipped to reveal bundles of cash and a rusted handgun. "Evidence from the robbery," the sheriff confirmed, his voice taut. He snapped quick orders into his radio. "We've got property. Suspect can't be far. Seal the perimeter." As the team secured the area, the pups continued to circle, barking insistently at a narrow ravine beyond the trees. One deputy crept forward and signaled. "Fresh prints leading down the slope," he reported, "still bleeding." The sheriff turned to Martha, his expression softening despite the urgency. "Ma'am, these dogs didn't just stumble onto your porch. They were guiding you, and now us, all along. They may have saved more lives than we'll ever know." Martha felt a swell of awe and fear as she watched the puppies stand guard over the hidden evidence. What she thought was an act of simple kindness, opening her door to two freezing strays, was becoming clear. These animals were more than victims of the cold. They were brave little witnesses, protectors in disguise, and the key to bringing a dangerous man to justice. The forest grew eerily still as deputies moved to surround the ravine. Snow crunched softly under their boots, each step deliberate. The two pups stayed close to the edge, noses twitching, their sharp barks bouncing off the trees like echoes of urgency. Sheriff Dalton raised a hand, signaling silence. Everyone froze, listening. From the shadows below came a faint rustle, too heavy for a squirrel, too controlled for falling snow. The sheriff's jaw set. "He's down there," he whispered. "Armed or not, he's cornered." He turned to Martha, his eyes narrowing with concern. "Ma'am, for your own safety, please step back toward the cabin." But Martha didn't move. Something inside her refused to leave. She thought of the midnight knocks, the bloody fabric hidden under her porch, and the terrified puppies who had sought her out. Fear coursed through her veins, but another feeling rose stronger. Resolve. "These little ones trusted me first," she said quietly. "I'm not about to walk away now." The sheriff hesitated, reading the determination in her weathered face. Finally, he nodded. "Stay behind me, no sudden moves." The dogs gave a sudden, sharp bark, then went silent, their eyes locked on a dark figure in the snowbank. An instant later, a man stumbled into view, a gaunt figure in a torn jacket, one arm wrapped in blood-stained cloth. His eyes darted wildly as he tried to climb the opposite slope. "Stop! Sheriff's Department!" Dalton's voice thundered through the cold. Deputies raised their weapons, but Martha stepped forward just enough for her voice to carry. "It's over," she called, her tone steady, almost maternal. "Don't make this worse. You're hurt. Let them help you." The man froze, chest heaving. For a heartbeat, only the forest's quiet breath filled the air. Then he dropped to his knees, the fight draining from his body. Deputies moved in swiftly, handcuffing him and securing the weapon hidden beneath his coat. Relief swept through the group like a sudden warm wind. The sheriff turned to Martha with a look of deep respect. "Ma'am, you may have just prevented a tragedy. Your calm might have saved lives, including his." Martha exhaled, feeling the pups press against her boots, their small bodies vibrating with pride. She knelt to stroke their heads, whispering softly, "You did it, my brave ones. We did it together." Snowflakes drifted gently as deputies led the captured man up the slope, his head bowed and his injured arm bandaged in makeshift cloth. The flashing lights from the police vehicles cast long streaks of red and blue across the white ground, painting the forest in surreal colors. Martha stood near the cabin porch, the two puppies pressed warmly against her legs, watching in a daze as the long night of fear finally gave way to a calm, triumphant morning. Sheriff Dalton approached with steady steps, his breath misting in the cold. "It's over," he said quietly, almost with relief. "The suspect is in custody. We've recovered the stolen cash and the weapon. Because of you and these little heroes, we can close this case before anyone else gets hurt." Martha blinked, still processing the whirlwind of the last 12 hours. "I only opened my door," she murmured almost to herself. "It was the dogs who knew." Dalton allowed a small, genuine smile. "Maybe, but you trusted their instincts and stayed calm when it mattered. That made all the difference." He crouched to run a hand gently over the puppy's soft fur. They wagged their tails proudly, basking in the sheriff's praise. "I'll make sure the department recognizes their part in this. They deserve it." Deputies moved about the yard, photographing the hidden evidence and sealing bags of stolen money. Others offered Martha warm coffee from a thermos and checked that she was unharmed. Each thanked her in quiet, earnest tones. Despite the cold, the atmosphere carried a strange warmth, relief and gratitude replacing the night's tension. As the last police vehicle prepared to leave with the handcuffed man inside, Dalton turned back to Martha. "You may get questions from investigators in town," he explained. "But for now the danger has passed. You and these pups can finally rest." Martha exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of fear lift from her shoulders. She looked down at the puppies, their bright eyes reflecting the morning light. They had brought chaos to her doorstep, yet also courage and unexpected companionship. Gently, she whispered, "You came here for a reason, didn't you?" The larger pup gave a soft bark as if in answer. In that quiet, snowy clearing, it felt less like coincidence and more like fate, that two brave little creatures had found her just in time to change everything. The sun climbed higher, scattering golden light across the glittering snow, but Martha hardly noticed the cold. She stood on her porch with the two puppies nestled against her wool skirt, their small bodies radiating warmth. The sheriff's last words echoed in her mind. "You and these pups can finally rest." After a night filled with fear and mystery, a deep, quiet peace settled over the cabin. Inside, the fire burned low, casting a soft orange glow across the room. Martha brewed fresh tea and set out a bowl of warm milk for her unexpected guests. The larger pup trotted over first, tail wagging, while the smaller one gave a happy yip and followed, watching them lap eagerly. Martha felt a gentle swell of gratitude. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, opening her door to two freezing animals, had become something extraordinary, a chance to save lives and to find purpose again. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Dalton returned briefly, this time without urgency. He handed her a neatly folded paper. "This is just a note of thanks from the department," he said, his eyes kind, "and a reminder that these little ones are heroes in their own right. If you'd like, we can help find them a home. But something tells me they've already found it." Martha smiled, a rare warmth brightening her weathered face. "They're home," she said simply. The pups seemed to understand, climbing onto her lap and curling up as if sealing the decision themselves. Before leaving, the sheriff tipped his hat. "You know, ma'am, most people would have ignored those knocks. Your kindness didn't just save these dogs, it helped catch a dangerous man. The town owes you more than thanks." As dusk settled, Martha sat by the window, the puppies asleep beside her. their soft breaths filling the quiet room. For years, she had lived in solitude, believing her days of making a difference were behind her. Now, with two brave little companions by her side, she felt something she hadn't in years, needed, alive, and deeply connected to the world beyond the woods. She stroked their silky ears and whispered with a smile, "You were meant to find me." Outside, the forest lay calm and safe, as if it too understood that this unexpected family was exactly where it belonged.